I'm Amara, and this is my sanctuary. Not just a house, a monument to everything they said I'd never be. The Portland rain hums against the windows, a rhythm that's carried me through years of silence. My latest poem, Roots Unbound, echoes through the speakers. Words I carve from the quiet they used to erase me. Right now, my family, the ones who wrote me out of their story, stands on my doorstep, their faces pale as the fog rolling off the Willamette River. Before I tell you what happened when I opened that door, I need you to hear this. This isn't just my story. It's for anyone who's been erased, who's had to rebuild from the ashes of rejection. If you've ever fought to prove you belong, drop a comment below, share your truth. And if stories of rewriting your legacy, of turning pain into power, speak to you, hit that subscribe button, because this is about all of us who were told we didn't fit until we built spaces where we did. This is my story, a journey from silence to strength, a tapestry woven from the threads of rejection, resilience, and the family I chose. Let me take you back to a time when I was still searching for my place, when the world felt like a puzzle I didn't fit into. 12 years ago, I was 24, living in a cramped apartment in Portland's Alberta Arts District. The walls were thin as promises, the rent a monthly gamble, and my life a patchwork of notebooks, coffee stains, and dreams I wasn't sure would ever take root. I was a poet, not by choice, but by necessity. Words were the only way I could make sense of the chaos inside me, the only way I could name the things my family refused to see. My family, the Warrens, are Portland old money, their wealth tied to timber fortunes and real estate empires. To them, life was a ledger, every choice a transaction. My father, Richard, built skyscrapers that reshaped the city skyline. My mother, Eleanor, curated their legacy with the precision of a museum director. My sister, Nora, followed their path, her vineyard deals and boardroom charm the pride of their empire. My brother, Felix, was the tech visionary, always chasing the next big app. And me? I was the odd one out, the girl who wrote poems instead of contracts, who saw beauty in the cracks they wanted to pave over. They didn't just disapprove of my choices, they erased me for them. It started long before 2013, if I'm honest. I remember being 12, reading a poem at a family dinner, my voice shaking with pride. It was about the river, how it carried secrets no one could own. Nora rolled her eyes and said, "That's cute, Amara, but it's not real work." Eleanor smiled thinly and said, "You'll grow out of it." Richard didn't look up from his plate. Felix, still a teenager, just shrugged. That was the first time I felt it. Their dismissal, like a door closing softly but firmly. By the time I was in college, studying literature instead of business, the door was locked. They stopped asking about my classes, stopped inviting me to their galas. I was becoming a ghost in their story, and I didn't even know it yet. But 2013 was the year it became undeniable. I opened an email one summer day, the subject line reading, "Warren Family Gathering, 2013. My heart raced as I scrolled, searching for my name, for any sign I was included. There was nothing, no invite, no mention, just a detailed schedule of barbecues, lake trips, and Eleanor gushing about Nora's latest vineyard acquisition. Photos from the previous year's gathering showed Felix grilling salmon, Richard lounging under a canopy, Nora laughing with a glass of rose, everyone smiling like they'd cracked the secret to joy. I checked my spam folder, refreshed the page, stared at the screen for 10 minutes, willing my name to appear. It didn't. This wasn't a mistake. It was a verdict handed down without a trial. I opened Instagram hoping for a clue, and there it was, a post from Nora. She was at a sleek downtown bistro, toasting with craft cocktails alongside Mom, Dad, and Felix. The caption read, "Planning the Warren Legacy Bash. Blood is everything. Blood is everything," she wrote, and I felt the air leave the room. My journal was open beside me, a half-finished poem staring back. They cut the branch, but kept the tree. I wrote to my mom, my fingers hesitant. "Hey, saw the gathering plans. Was my invite lost? Love, Amara." Her reply came within an hour. "Sweetheart, we figured you'd be swamped with your writing. Big events aren't your thing, right? Love you." I read it 3 times, once for the words, twice for the lie. They didn't forget me. They chose to erase me. That moment broke something in me, but it also built something new. I created a folder on my laptop and named it Proof. Into it, I dragged screenshots, the email, Nora's post, Mom's reply. My hands shook, not with anger, but with clarity. I wasn't imagining this. They weren't just annoyed I'd chosen poetry over a corner office at their firm. They decided I wasn't a Warren. I heard Nora's voice from a fight years earlier, when I'd read a poem at another family dinner. This one about the city's underbelly, the people their skyscrapers displaced. You're not part of this family, Amara, she said. You're just noise we can't mute. Those words cut deeper than the silence, but they gave me something to hold on to, a truth I could no longer ignore. I started keeping evidence, not to dwell, but to prove I wasn't crazy. Every email that excluded me, every Instagram post of their perfect gatherings, every text that went unanswered, I saved them all. I sent birthday cards that came back unopened, marked undeliverable. I kept them in a box under my bed, cold proof that I'd tried, that I'd reached out into the silence and gotten nothing back. There was a Christmas card I sent in 2014 with a poem about bridges and the spaces between us. It came back with my address scratched out. I saved that too. Each piece was a brick in a wall I didn't want to build but had to, a record of their choice to erase me. Portland doesn't care who your family is. It lets you vanish and still shine. In 2014, I found my footing at an open mic night in a coffee shop, where the air smelled of espresso and possibility. I performed a poem called Silent Cartography, raw and rhythmic, about mapping a life no one else could see. My voice shook, but the words held. The crowd snapped their fingers, a wave of approval that felt like a lifeline. That's where I met Daniel, a 28-year-old novelist with a quiet intensity and a passion for storytelling. He approached me after, his notebook clutched like a shield, and said, "Your words cut through the noise. I'm Daniel. Let's talk." We did for hours over chamomile tea and shared dreams. Daniel got me. His own family had shunned him for pursuing writing instead of the law, for refusing to conform to their expectations. His father had called him a disappointment. His mother had stopped speaking to him for years. We were both outcasts, both survivors, and we saw each other in a way our families never could. Daniel and I moved into a drafty loft later that year, a place with creaky floors and a roof that leaked when the rain got heavy. We turned it into a haven for words, his manuscripts piled on the kitchen counter, my poems taped to the fridge. One night, over burnt toast and tea, Daniel raised his mug and said, "No family baggage. We're our own roots now. Deal?" I clinked my mug against his and said, "Deal." We didn't need to unpack our wounds. We knew they were there, mirrored in the silences we'd both endured. Daniel told me about the night he told his parents he wouldn't be a lawyer, how his father's words left a scar deeper than any blade. I told him about the Christmas dinner when I was 16, when Eleanor said my poetry was a phase, a distraction from the family's legacy. We didn't ask for more details. We just built something new, something ours. Life in that loft wasn't easy. We lived on grit and gigs, scraping by on open mic tips and freelance work. I sent poems to journals, applied to residencies, collected rejections that stung like salt in a wound. But each one pushed me harder, made me sharper. I wasn't writing for the Warrens anymore. I was writing for me, for the part of me they couldn't erase. Daniel faced his own battles. His novels were rejected for being too unconventional, too raw. But he kept writing, kept staging readings in basements and backyards. We held each other up through the rejections, the late nights, the moments when the silence from our families felt like it might swallow us whole. In 2015, I met Theo, a muralist with a quiet intensity that drew me in. He was at one of my readings, sketching in a leather-bound book while I performed a poem about roots breaking through concrete. Afterward, he showed me his drawing, a swirl of lines that captured the cadence of my words. He didn't ask about my family, didn't pry into my pain. He just said, "Your words make colors in my head. I'm Theo." We started meeting up, walking through Powell's books or along the river, talking about art, dreams, anything but the past. One night, surrounded by stacks of poetry collections, he said, "Your poems don't need their approval. They're already home." Those words stayed with me, a reminder that I was building something real, something mine. But there were low points, nights when the silence felt heavier than I could bear. In 2016, I was alone in the loft, rain hammering the roof, a rejection email glowing on my screen. Another journal had passed on my work, Their feedback polite but cutting. Not the right fit. I wondered if I'd ever be the right fit anywhere. Daniel came home that night, soaked from a storm, his eyes raw. He held a crumpled wedding invite, his brother's. Guest only, he said. They don't want me reading at the reception. Too disruptive. I wrapped him in a blanket, and we sat on the floor, sharing a bowl of instant noodles. No words, just the kind of quiet that knows you're not alone. I pulled out my box of proof, returned cards, ignored texts, and said they think we're ghosts. Daniel nodded and said, then let's haunt them with what we build. That night, we promised each other we'd keep going, no matter how loud the silence got. In 2017, things started to shift. I published my first chapbook, Silent Cartography, a collection of poems about absence and belonging. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found readers, people who saw themselves in my words. I started performing at festivals, my voice carrying further than I'd ever dreamed. Daniel's novels got published, his stories sparking conversations. Theo's murals turned Portland's walls into canvases, his art weaving my poems into the city's skin. The Warrens stayed silent, but I stopped waiting for their call. I was building a life louder than their absence, a life that didn't need their validation. One night in 2018, Daniel came home with a letter he'd found in a dumpster behind his publisher's office. It was in my mom's handwriting, my birthday card from 3 years back unopened. He handed it to me and said, someday they'll knock. And when they do, answer with everything you've become. I kept that letter in my box, not as a wound, but as a reminder. They could ignore me, but they couldn't erase me. Not anymore. In 2019, I found a new purpose. I started volunteering at a community center, mentoring young poets who reminded me of myself. Kids told they didn't belong, their voices dismissed as too loud, too strange. One of them was Lucia, a 16-year-old in foster care, her eyes guarded but bright. She shared a poem about her foster family's rejection, her voice trembling but true. I listened, then handed her a journal and said, write it all. Your truth is enough. Lucia's courage was a mirror, reflecting the girl I'd been, the girl the Warrens had erased. She wrote every week, her poems growing bolder, her voice stronger. One day, she said, you make me feel like I'm not alone. I told her, you never were. You're family now. Lucia's first poetry slam was in 2020 at a community center packed with kids like her. She took the stage, her hand shaking, and read a poem called Fracture about the homes that break you and the ones you build. The crowd roared, and I felt a pride I'd never known. Lucia wasn't just a mentee. She was proof that our voices could heal, could matter. I started mentoring more kids, building a space where their words could breathe. Every rejection I'd faced, every silence from the Warrens, became fuel for something bigger. Then there was Kai, a quiet teen I met in 2020. They'd been kicked out of their home for refusing to follow their parents' strict path. Their poems a mix of rage and hope. We traded lines at the community center, their words cutting through the air like a blade. Kai said once, you make it feel like I'm not invisible. I said, you never were. You're just waiting for the world to catch up. Kai's first open mic was a revelation. They read a poem called Unnamed, about the names we're given and the ones we choose. The crowd snapped, so loud the room shook. Afterward, Kai hugged me, tears in their eyes, and said, I didn't know I could do that. I told them, you always could. I'm just here to remind you. In 2021, Kai's older sibling, Riley, reached out to them after years of silence. They met at a coffee shop, and I went along for support, sitting quietly in the corner. Riley apologized, their voice breaking, for not standing up when their parents kicked Kai out. Kai listened, then read a new poem, one about bridges rebuilt from ash. They didn't forgive Riley right away, but they started talking, meeting weekly to share stories, poems, and tentative steps toward healing. Kai's strength taught me something. Reconciliation doesn't always mean going back. Sometimes it means moving forward on your own terms. That same year, I met Mira, a radio host who'd heard my poetry at a festival. She invited me onto her show, Poetry in the Static, to read my work and talk about the kids I mentored. Mira was a force, her voice a beacon for Portland's misfits. We spent hours after recordings, debating art, justice, the families we'd lost. Her show gave my poems a wider reach, and we started planning workshops for young poets, dreaming of a space where their voices could thrive. In 2022, we hosted our first poetry festival, Voices Unbound, at a community park. Lucia read Fracture, Kai performed Unnamed, and I closed with a poem called Echoes of Absence, about the silence that shapes us and the voices that break it. The crowd was small but electric, hundreds of kids and adults snapping, chanting, crying. Mira aired the festival on her show, amplifying our voices across the city. That day, I knew the Amara Haven wasn't just a dream, it was possible. In 2023, Daniel faced a crisis of his own. His latest novel, Unbound, about resilience and self-discovery, was set to be published, but the editor tried to censor parts of it, calling it too unconventional. Daniel fought back, rallying community support, organizing readings at local venues to keep the book's message alive. I stood by him, reading poems at his events, helping him amplify his truth. The publisher backed down, and Unbound launched to a sold-out crowd, its words cutting through the noise. Daniel's victory wasn't just his, it was ours, a reminder that our voices could change the world. Theo faced his own battle that year. One of his murals, a tribute to Portland's unhoused community with my poem-woven roots painted across it, was vandalized, spray-painted with slurs. Theo didn't flinch. He organized a community painting day, inviting kids from the center, Lucia, Kai, and others to help restore it. We turned the mural into a collage of their words, their art, their dreams. When it was unveiled, Mira broadcasted it live on her show, calling it a monument to resilience. Theo hugged me that day and said, "We're not just rebuilding a wall. We're building a legacy." I nodded, knowing he was right. In 2024, I met Sam, a 17-year-old refugee poet from Somalia, who'd arrived in Portland after years in camps. Sam's poems were about displacement, memory, and the sea, written in Somali and English, each word a bridge to a home he'd lost. I mentored him at the community center, helping him translate his work, connecting him with cultural groups to share his story. Sam's first reading was at a community open mic, his poem Waves of Return a quiet storm that left the crowd in tears. He told me after, "You gave me a place to be heard." I said, "You gave yourself that place. I'm just here to open the door." Sam's courage, like Lucia's and Kai's, reminded me why I kept going, because every voice matters, every story deserves a home. By 2024, my poetry was in anthologies on podcasts, etched into public art across Portland. Daniel's novels were touring. Theo's murals were landmarks, and our loft felt too small for the life we'd built. I bought this house, a mansion by the Willamette, paid for with every word I'd written, every stage I'd claimed. No neutral tones, no compromises, just me. My poetry plays through the speakers, its cadence fierce and unyielding. Daniel's drafting his next novel in the kitchen. Theo's sketching in the studio, his lines weaving with my words. This is my family, the one I chose. The Amara Haven is my legacy, a community center for poets, dreamers, anyone told they don't belong. It's not just a dream. It's a promise, a place where silence becomes poetry, where rejection becomes roots. I've spent years collecting proof of my family's erasure, but now I'm collecting potential, building a space for Lucia, Kai, Sam, and every kid like them. We're planning workshops, scholarships, open mics, a poetry festival to launch in 2026. Myra's on board, ready to broadcast it all, to make sure every voice is heard. A week before they came, I received a letter from Felix. It was short, handwritten, the first contact in years. "Amara," he wrote, "I've been quiet too long. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. Can we talk?" I read it and felt nothing, not anger, not hope, just a calm resolve. I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to open that door, not yet. Then they came. My parents, Eleanor and Richard. My sister Nora, my brother Felix. The ones who erased me from every gathering, every toast, every memory. They stood on my doorstep, smiles polished as their tailored coats, like the past 12 years were a typo. I opened the door and said, "Sit." Eleanor's voice was honeyed. "Amara, this is extraordinary. You've outdone yourself." Richard nodded. "We always knew you had it in you." Nora chimed in. "It's like something from a design magazine." Felix mumbled. "Didn't see this coming." I didn't smile. I didn't perform. I invited them to dinner, but not for reconciliation, for truth. Dinner was a charade. They sat around my oak table, their small talk bouncing off the high ceilings. Nora bragged about her vineyard's expansion, how it's redefining the Warren brand. She spoke of her ambition, how she'd fought to prove herself in a family that valued power over passion. Felix droned on about his tech startup, another app to make the rich richer, but his voice cracked when he mentioned his son, Ezra, as if he knew what he'd cost him. Eleanor spoke of the next Warren gathering, as if I'd ever been part of one, her control as tight as ever. Richard stayed silent, his detachment a wall I'd never breached. Daniel served roasted vegetable curry, his eyes sharp watching. Theo poured kombucha, his presence steady. I let them talk, let their words fill the space, but I was waiting for the moment to show them who I'd become. I stood and said, I have something to share. I tapped my tablet, and a projector flickered on. The first slide was the 2013 gathering email, my name missing. Then Eleanor's email to Nora. Keep it small. Amara's too chaotic. Nora's Instagram post. Warren legacy forever. A returned letter, postmarked 2015 unopened. A wedding program from 2017, my name nowhere to be found. A voicemail from Nora, 2018. Amara, you're not invited. You don't match our vision. The room stilled. Spoons clinked against bowls. Eleanor's smile cracked. This isn't necessary, she said. We were protecting our family's image. Protecting it from me? My words? My truth? Daniel's phone was recording, his eyes sharp. Theo's hand grazed mine, steady. I played another slide, a text from Felix, 2016. Let's keep it simple this year. Amara's not ready. Then a group chat from 2019, planning a holiday party, my name absent. I looked at them and said, you didn't drift. You exiled me, but I built this anyway. Eleanor shifted, her voice icy. You've made your point, Amara. Can we move forward? Nora leaned forward, her tone sharp. You always were dramatic. Why drag this up now? I saw the jealousy in her eyes, the resentment that I'd built something without their name. Felix looked at his plate, muttering, it wasn't personal. But his letter proved he knew it was. Richard finally spoke. We did what we thought was best. For who? I asked. For your legacy? For your image? Or for you? Nora stood, her voice rising. You think you're better than us? You think this house, this life makes you whole? I said, no, Nora. It makes me free. Felix's eyes met mine, guilt flickering. Amara, I wrote you. I tried. I said, you tried too late. Eleanor's tone was steel. You're throwing away your family for strangers? I said, no, I'm building a family with them. Richard shook his head. You've always been stubborn. I nodded, and it saved me. I showed one last slide, a blueprint of the Amara Haven, a community center for young poets. This is my legacy, I said. Not yours. Nora scoffed. You're playing martyr. Felix whispered, we didn't mean to hurt you. I said, you didn't mean to, but you did. You chose your brand over your blood. They left, their footsteps sharp on the stone path. I locked the door, the click final, a sound that echoed in my chest. The next day, Nora came back alone. She stood in the rain, her coat soaked, and said, I didn't know it hurt you this much. I said, you didn't want to know. She admitted I was jealous. You were free, and I was trapped in their game. I listened, but I didn't forgive. I said, build your own freedom, Nora. This is mine. She left, and I knew that was the end. The morning after, the house felt alive. The Willamette sparkled, mist rising like a promise. Daniel sipped coffee, joking about turning the garage into a library for his next book. Theo sketched a mural for the Amara Haven, his lines dancing with my words. I pinned a flyer to a board. The Amara Haven, a home for unheard voices. Workshops, scholarships, open mics, a space where no one's told to dim their light. Then came a knock, not the front door, but the side. Felix stood there with his son, Ezra, a 9-year-old with a notebook clutched to his chest. Ezra looked up and said, you're the poetry lady. I wrote something for you. He read a poem, scrawled in crayon, about a house by a river, a figure reading under a tree. That's you, he said. You make words fly. I knelt, handed him a leather journal, and said, keep writing. Your voice matters. Felix looked at me, his voice low. I should have spoken up years ago. I'm sorry. I nodded and said, you're here now. Teach him to seek the truth. Ezra grinned, hugging his notebook. Daniel whispered, kids got your spark. Later, I stood in my study, sunlight streaming through. I pinned a schedule to the board, workshops, open mics, scholarships for the Amara Haven. A voicemail notification blinked. Eleanor. Amara, let's talk rationally. I deleted it without listening. I didn't need her words. I had my own. Here's a poem I wrote that week, Roots Unbound. They buried my name in silence, thinking I'd wither. But roots don't ask permission to grow. They crack stone, reach for light, twist through earth's refusal. I am no ghost. I am the tree they couldn't fell, the song they couldn't silence. My branches hold the sky. My leaves whisper truths they'll never hear. This is my ground, my bloom, my unbound becoming. Another poem from 2020 called Fracture. The house I came from broke me, its walls too tight for my breath. But I gathered the shards, build a new home in the open. Each crack a story, each seam a song. I am not their ruin. I am my own reconstruction. And one more from 2024 called Woven Roots. We are not the branches they cut. We're the roots they couldn't reach, weaving through soil they never tilled. Our voices rise, not to beg but to claim. This earth is ours, this song is ours, and we will sing until the silence breaks.